get the PowerPoint going.
And now we're looking at something that's more 50-50, meaning 50% service reductions, 50% citywide balancing solution. So we've moved that needle in that direction. As a result, we have fewer positions that are recommended to be reduced or eliminated. Last time we were with you, there were 91 positions that were proposed for reduction. We're now at 74 positions that are proposed for reduction. Across all funds, we're also looking at 26 part-time positions. And then at the very, very bottom, you can see in the general fund that difference between the proposed revenues and proposed expenses to give you that 839,000. So originally, we were looking at 943. We're now up to 960 as part of this recommended budget, as well as in the general fund, we are at 512 FTE, whereas we were 496. Of the 74 full-time positions that are recommended to be reduced, about 34 of these are filled and about 41 are vacant. Just because a position is vacant and or filled doesn't necessarily articulate the impact of the services. Oftentimes, many of us wear multiple hats when there are vacancies, as well as when positions are filled or vacant, we'll be looking at redeployments, bumping, as well as placements as ways to mitigate potential separations of employees to all mitigate these impacts. These are the final rates that the council provided direction to staff on May 13th, I think. As you can see, the majority of them are zeros, with gas, fiber, and storm drain at 2 or 2.5% recommended changes. It's about $1.47 per month for the residential monthly bill change.
So one thing I want to just, and have a couple high level things. One of them is, we're talking about a $39 million drop, which, we estimate as being our projection. But I don't know if the rest of you guys saw the New York Times article on the California economy and how the California economy is just falling to pieces. And, I look at what other cities have been doing, like for instance, Santa Monica, and their cuts are a lot larger. I mean, the budget's about our size, but their cuts are much, much larger than ours. And so I do wonder whether, I actually think the 39 million is actually optimistic at this point. I thought I was optimistic before, but I really think it's optimistic now. And I do worry about what we're really going to see as time goes on. So I am very concerned that even though the cuts we're making now are very, very painful, at least from what I'm seeing in the economic, it looks like it's going to be much, much worse. So I'm concerned about that. And I don't know whether we as council should talk a little bit more about that, especially once the actual numbers come out for 2020. So because that's something I think we need to kind of look at reality and see how that is matching up to our projections. And we may find that the reality is not hitting the projections. And so I think that's something that we got to be very cognizant of, because otherwise we're going to be cutting again, like another quarter or 2 quarters from now. And I don't know if that's going to be good or not.
Very briefly comment on that. What we have seen very clearly is that the health emergency is impacting communities in very different ways. So using Santa Monica as one example, they're probably actually, for what it's worth, on one end of the spectrum, in that so much of their revenue has been based on the tourism industry. And as you know, that both hotel taxes as well as parking revenues in particular really significantly impacting that particular community. In our case, while we depend on hotel tax, it has not been a tourism-based hotel usage. It's been largely business and academic oriented and tend to be more stable. But that said, obviously, we're experiencing a big impact.
Yeah, no, I agree. But we also have Stanford Shopping Center, which is a fairly significant, not just our shopping center, but University Avenue, California Avenue, and our retail has all been shut down. So I think you make a good point about maybe we don't have as many tourists, but we do have a fairly substantial retail in our city, and that's been hit. And something like 50% of retailers are projected to shut down, like not come back. So I think we are actually a little bit stronger in terms of retail. At least we're stronger in retail, and so this may be a handicap for ourselves. But my concern is, by looking at the economic data, it looks like things are not headed the right way, and that this $39 million that we're talking about right now may not be enough. And so that's a concern that I have. So for me, I declined to get the printed packet, mainly because from my office, I've pretty much gone paperless. And the reason why I've been able to go paperless is because I have a ton of monitors. So I'm able to kind of see everything all at once without a problem. So as long as we shelter in place, I have no problem skipping the printed copy. I realize some of my colleagues don't have this set up. The monitors actually are very cheap these days. The other thing I've been thinking about is, there's 7 of us, $35,000. You could have a pretty nice setup. If you just took that $35,000 and divided by 7, literally buy a bunch of iPad Pros or something and save a ton of trees and a bunch of carbon footprint. If we just had a bunch of iPad or a bunch of screens, we could probably do something very similar. So for me, I'm actually more efficient with it electronically than I am printed, but I think the money could be used towards getting a better setup where we can go paperless. But that would be my preference versus having more greenhouse gas. But I think in general, I would love for us, especially we're Palo Alto, we're supposed to be center of technology, for us to actually move into a more advanced technical state versus what we've been doing. Just maybe propose a friendly amendment is that, so we still budget $35,000, and maybe what we do is we give people a choice. They could use the money to get printed copies, or they could use the money to perhaps buy more monitors or buy an iPad or whatever, so that it's a choice. As I mentioned earlier, I think there's a very high chance that the 39 million that we're estimating is actually too small, and we're gonna have to do a lot more. I hope that's not true, but it's looking like it. So I think trying to save as much as we can is gonna be important. And our complexes, our finances are already really complex. So I do wonder if we need yet another reserve, another fund, right? Or whether we just use the ones we have. Like, why not just put it in the BSR? I guess I'm trying to understand what's the rationale with having yet another special fund, because our budget is incredibly intricate right now. And so maybe the finance director can talk a little bit about this in terms of what are the advantages of having yet another fund versus what are the advantages of having yet another fund versus just putting the BSR and trying to start building it back a bit and having it go down as much as it's probably going to be.
Sure. Thank you, council member. It's really a policy call and a transparency thing, not in a negative or a positive, just whether or not you want to call out this funding specifically as part of the reserve and getting towards the reserve goal versus knowing that you want to allocate it in a certain way and setting it aside in its own pot.
I guess for me, it would be better just keeping the BSR, because I think we should simplify our finances versus making it even yet more complex. And it's hard to know exactly where it's going to go. I mean, I think people have already mentioned 4 or 5, probably a lot more that it might be needed. And when we take action, we're going to all have to vote on it anyways. So I don't know in terms of if it's increased transparency or not. So I think I'm just in favor of trying to make already really complex budget simpler. So for Coverly, my concern here is the impact to our schools. And I think we're not really saving money when we take money away from our schools. I think there's many ways to do it, and whether it's keeping the cover lease or curtailing it but still helping the schools. So I guess I'm more in mind of keeping the funding for the schools, maybe not through a lease, but I'm just concerned. A lot of parents are concerned about like what's going to happen to the school district. We had the school liaison meeting as well. School board members are also concerned. I think education is like a big important topic for a lot of people here in the community. So I guess for this, I'm in favor of not curtailing funding for our schools. So I'd like to make a motion for that. Basically, rather than take away the 2.5 million, I rather that we find a way to make sure that our schools are able to be fully funded, especially during these extraordinary times. I guess my main point is the schools are getting the funding this way, 2.5, but I'm not hung up on having it to be a lease. It could be other ways. How it happens, whether it's through a lease or whether it's through some sort of separate funding agreement. But I do know that the schools kind of count on this money. They're already experiencing their own budget shortfall. And my concern is by taking the funding from the schools are still going to have to go to the taxpayer for money, which a lot of the taxpayers actually need are hurting. So it's hard for them to pay more, right? So I don't think we're solving our budget problems by taking money from the school district, because it's the same payer at the end. It's the same taxpayer. There's a few other cuts I'd like to propose. So can Seth bring up page 10 of attachment A, exhibit 1? So there's a transfer of $300,000 position to the city manager office. And I guess I'm trying to understand why would we transfer one police lieutenant to the city manager's office?
We as staff are doing our best, frankly, to not bring in new staff, but reallocate existing staff based on the need and where the bodies of work lie. And so this is one example of that reallocation, so that we aren't bringing in new staff, we're not hiring new employees, but we are making sure that we're resourcing the areas that need it most urgently at this time.
But my general feel here is I think the police, especially people who are facing the community, are much more valuable, much more valued by the community than, not to say the city manager is not important, but I think the city manager's office is already pretty big. So to me, it just seemed kind of out of place, especially when we're already cutting the police. So why not just keep it here? So I make the motion that we keep this funding in the police department versus make the city manager's office even bigger. Page 190 of the operating budget book. So I noticed we have 6 people in HR that were doing recruiting. And given that we're laying off a bunch of people, why do we need to have 6 recruiters? It just seems kind of weird when, like, who are we recruiting for when we're laying people off? So I'm trying to understand, why do we need can we get away with 2? Do we have to have 5? Why do you need to have so many?
Yes, we actually do have a recruiting unit of approximately 5 people right now. It often is running understaffed, and we had just gotten to full staffing. We actually supplement this recruiting the group with contracts and supplemental assistance. The 5 are not enough to support what is a normal recruiting activity.
Filling on this, we have 40 million people unemployed, 25% unemployment, as Councilman Fulsa says many times in California. We're laying people off, right? It's, pre-COVID, it was a super hard. It was a employee market. It was super hard to recruit people. Now, like, it's one of the worst job markets in history, right? So I think if we're looking to figure out what do we want to spend our resources on, to me, just having such a large recruiting department, especially when we already have outside contractors as well supplementing this, just seems out of place. I'd like to make the motion that we move this along. And the reason why is because almost 99% of our emergency calls are for medical. Only like 1% is for fire. Since that's the predominant mode, it seems to make sense that we would want to optimize the dominant mode of use, which is medical, not fire. So, so I've been looking at the list of employees, and it's a pretty big list. And you look at this section here, which is the management part. And when you do the math, it's pretty astounding that 1 out of 5, about 20% of the employees are managers, right? And the point of this is that we're making some very deep cuts in this budget, and it would seem that it would behoove us to understand, is there structural changes we can make to move some of the dollars we're having on the management side to more of the people doing the work. And so I guess what I'm interested in is if we can, as part of this motion, to include a 1 to 4 span of control is very unusual. It's a very low span of control versus what's typical in most other places, which is 1 to 8 or at maybe worth 1 to 7. I think, and I've seen a lot of community members who've written in about this, a lot of office hours on this topic as well. And I actually talked to a organizational design expert. She actually charges tons of money to analyze organizations. And this is one of the things she also mentioned to me on Sunday as well. And so, in the times when we're going to more self-managed teams, when pretty much most organization is like 1 to 8, that's the average. And I asked her, she actually did some consulting with the city and county of San Francisco, and she even mentioned there that it seemed like they had a much wider or a higher span of control than we have in our city. And I think when we look at this budget, I think it's important to actually understand what is that really, because I hear different conflicting numbers. Of course, what we're looking at here is not a detailed org chart, it's just a download of a spreadsheet with who is in the management unit. So as a friendly amendment would be for staff to report out what is the true span of control within the city. And I think that should be fairly easy because they already have the org charts. It's not exposed to the public. The org charts you have in the budget report are abstracted, so you can't really tell what it is. All we can do is look at the spreadsheet. And I think this would help put community members at ease in terms of the concern about, well, gee, it seems like a lot of managers for not that many employees. So anyways, I'm hoping that the maker and the seconder would accept this. And I think this would help give more transparency to the community and help us make better decisions.